Hello and welcome to the session from the International Compliance Association focusing on anti-money laundering in New Zealand. My name is Becca Dare. I'm Director of International Compliance Training. This presentation is part of the big compliance conversation as well. So why is anti-money laundering such a key focus for New Zealand at the moment? The focus on anti-money laundering is now truly global. Anti-money laundering underpins international organised crime, crimes that are acquisitive in nature. We're talking about huge industries such as Class A drugs, human trafficking, fraud, cybercrime. All of these generate vast amounts of criminal capital, and that's not even touching on bribery and corruption. The standards around the world in the past 15 years have been raised dramatically by a series of international initiatives, standard setters such as the United Nations, the Financial Action Task Force, the European Union, as well as local legislators. So New Zealand's global partners are now starting to really challenge and assess New Zealand's competency in this area, and they expect high standards. Also, I've been privileged in the last 15, 20 years to see the development of a brand new profession, a global profession of compliance practitioners who are working to focus on anti-money laundering efforts within the regulated sector. And as we've seen in New Zealand itself, the number of firms and industries caught by money laundering laws and regulations has really grown. We now know obviously that lawyers and corporate service providers are in scope, as have obviously banks been for some time, the gaming industry and so forth. We also know that AML is a global problem. In fact, the term money laundering, I think, really undersells the significance of the issue we're talking about here. We're talking about property created by crime, and organised criminal groups, transnational criminal groups, are just that. They are truly transnational, they are global, and we know that these groups, as well as corrupt politicians, seek havens for their illicit capital. And as we shall see, some of that illicit capital has hit New Zealand. We also know that the threats are changing rapidly, both the global nature of international crime and local homegrown threats in New Zealand. Local organised criminal groups, the rise of methamphetamines, organised gangs, and the range of criminal activity hitting New Zealand shores from international agencies and actors has continued to increase. So it really is an important time for New Zealand, and I think we're at a crossroads here. Just to explore that theme a little bit more, we saw New Zealand highlighted through various trust structures featuring significantly in the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists expose on the Panama Papers. And we know that this led to a huge focus in prioritising the push for enhanced legislation in New Zealand, moving it up the priority queue. We saw vast amounts of foreign cash flowing into some of the over 11,000 foreign trusts registered in New Zealand. And this is bad actors, this is corrupt politicians, this is organised criminal groups, and this is tax evaders, all utilising and targeting New Zealand's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And that's not good for New Zealand's international reputation. New Zealand has, as I've mentioned already, been very much in the international spotlight. So the Financial Action Task Force, which is the lead international intergovernmental agency raising standards on AML, continues to scrutinise New Zealand. We have an upcoming mutual evaluation in 2019, which is really going to dive into the effectiveness of New Zealand's anti-money laundering regime. Not just the law on paper, but they will explore, what happens in practice. Do firms actually do customer due diligence? Do they make suspicious activity reports? Do regulators and law enforcement properly regulate and prosecute? So FATF can't fine anyone, but their findings will be hugely significant for the New Zealand economy, and New Zealand's global reputation, because capital flies from risk. So we know that there's going to be a lot of focus in the next few years on New Zealand there. Also, I work globally with pretty much all the tier 1 banks all over the world, North America, Europe, the APAC region, and we know New Zealand is very much plugged in and reliant on a global correspondent banking network, access to global markets and global capital, including the US, Singapore, Australia. So poor assessments of New Zealand's risk rating or their robustness of their AML regimes could really hit the New Zealand economy and New Zealand firms hard. And again, this is not an academic risk for New Zealand. I don't know if you're all familiar with the so-called Russian laundromat or the global laundromat and the more recent Azerbaijani laundromat cases. Vast, elaborate global networks of what we call brass plate companies that are incorporated largely on paper, funneling illicit capital out of Russia. And Azerbaijan. This is typically money stolen by public officials, money that could be used and should be used to build infrastructure, provide healthcare, education, but instead it's being laundered around the world through front companies, false litigation, sham business deals, and many of the companies involved in this huge global scandal were incorporated in New Zealand. Really fascinating case, actually, and if you've not read much about the global laundromat, I would suggest you do some Googling, go to the go to the OCCRP website, which talks about the way that these companies were set up and the role of corporate structures in moving this illicit capital. So what is the key knowledge for this new profession of anti-money laundering practitioners? What skills do we need? The International Compliance Association is a global network of professionals, and we award professional qualifications, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do in a minute. But we really are global, and we're providing skills that you can see on the screen there. So skills around doing risk assessments, properly understanding risk assessment methodology. How do we understand what makes one client riskier than another? What makes one product riskier than another? What makes one jurisdiction riskier? And what are the emerging threats from things like new payment methods? So mobile technology, prepaid cards, virtual currencies, internet-based payment systems. How are criminals actually targeting the financial system? How are they moving their illicit capital? How are they using lawyers, accountants, the so-called gatekeepers? How do corporate service providers fit into this? And what should banks and insurance companies be doing? We also have a global insight into the international movements on regulation and best practice around anti-money laundering. A key focus in the last few years around the world has been on CDD, customer due diligence. This is really understanding who your customers are and asking more detailed questions based on the risks involved. For example, what is the source of their wealth? What is the point is a very good question in CDD. Why is the customer coming to us? How are they intending to use the products and services we provide? And crucially, what does normal look like? Beneficial ownership is a huge focus, understanding who your customers really are. You have a corporate customer, a company comes to your bank or insurance company or law firm. Who really controls that company? Who pulls the strings? Because we know organised criminals, corrupt politicians, they love to hide behind corporate structures. For example, using nominee directors or shareholders, trying to pull the strings while cloaking their true identities. Another huge global focus in the last 10 years has been on sanctions. In the last few months, we've seen dramatic escalations in respect of North Korea, Russia, Iran, movement on Venezuela, and increasingly all countries are having to consider, how do we ensure we don't do business with prohibited jurisdictions? How do we make sure our transactions are not breaching either our own sanctions restrictions in our own country or internationally extraterritorial applicable regimes such as the American OFAC sanctions regimes? And then finally, another area you may not be that au fait with is international trade. We know that corrupt politicians, organised criminal groups now use trade to launder money. They lie about what's in container ships, they fake documents, they fake trade deals, and they're effectively moving, transferring value worth billions around the globe. Less than 2% of containers ever get inspected according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So the question is, what's really in a container ship in the middle of the Pacific? Is it really containing the goods it's supposed to? And if not, what's really there? And is it being used by organised crime? Now, we offer qualifications from basic entry level right up to head of and board level to tackle many of these issues. So the sort of thing that we would look at, and an area that's been focused on a lot, is understanding corporate structures. So, for example, your firm may have a company as company A as a client, and you will want to understand who controls that company. This is doing your money laundering, know your customer, or CDD checks. You find out it's owned by two companies, company B and C, and 50% shares. Is that good enough? No. We need to understand who are the human beings behind these companies who in turn ultimately own and control our client. So we need to unwrap the structure. And you may start to find a human being in a company structure. So Mr. D here has 30% of our customer through this ownership structure. Typically, international banks and firms would apply a 25% threshold to say anyone who owns more than 25% of our entity is a ultimate beneficial owner, and we must do money laundering checks on them. But many firms would do this in a simplistic way, and they'd unwrap a structure such as I'm showing you now with various levels of ownership, and they would determine that because they had only found one person who owns more than 30%, they had done their job for money laundering purposes. The danger in not fully exploring and unwrapping a corporate structure is you miss something. And in not fully unwrapping or understanding a corporate structure, you may miss something important. That, for example, in this structure, the last piece of the puzzle is that Mr. E on the left-hand side of the structure owns 20% of company A. He owns 100% of company X, which owns 40% of company B. So in turn, he owns 20% of our client. But he's also on the other side of the structure, if you see Mr. E on the right-hand side with a 20% holding. So looking across the structure, we can see Mr. E clearly is a beneficial owner. So we know that organised criminals do use elaborate and complex structures, and we'll give you the tools to understand that and do due diligence on corporate structures. The CDD process is something I've been privileged to work with firms all over the world, and the standards again have dramatically risen. Now there's a lot more of a focus on taking you through the KYC or CDD process, starting off from identifying who our customers are and that they really exist, and then starting to build up a meaningful profile. So if they are a corporate entity, who controls them? If they're an individual or corporate, where is the source of funds and source of wealth behind that customer? And screening them, checking the adverse media, negative news, just a good old-fashioned Google search. Is there bad stuff in the press about this customer? And if so, how credible are those allegations? And then obviously deciding a risk rating from this process. Are they high risk, medium risk, low risk, or are they unacceptable risk and a client we cannot do business with? And then of course, regulators will tell you if it ain't written down, it didn't happen. So we need to keep a documented record of this process that can be subject to scrutiny from law enforcement and regulators, perhaps years after the event. And of course, this whole process is ongoing. We don't just do this once with a client because things change. So screening is something else that a lot of firms are wrestling with at the moment. For example, SWIFT messages, the way that global financial institutions move money, communicate messages about those movements around the world. They typically have fields in them. So banks will be screening these internationally to make sure that there is no problem with breaching sanctions. So this is an example of a sanitized real SWIFT message which has been picked up for a possible sanctions alert. And the one word on this payment message is the word ISAM. Now, Azam is the name of an Iranian ship which is on the American OFAC sanctions list. Therefore, the bank that's processing this payment will need to investigate this payment and make sure that they're not breaching any international laws or sanctions regimes. Huge piece of work if you think about the number of payments that any bank or global financial institution processes every day. So that's a bit of an idea of some of the really sort of hot topics and area of focus. I'm really excited to say that we are launching ICA qualifications specifically in New Zealand this year. In fact, in April, we will be running sessions in Auckland and Wellington. You can also do the qualifications by distance learning through virtual classrooms as well. So we have a couple of open day sessions happening in New Zealand. So please come along, meet us, talk to myself and my colleagues to learn more about the International Compliance Association, what we do, what we stand for, and our qualifications that we provide. We're also going to be doing some hot topic briefings as well. We have dates for those hot topic sessions in Auckland on the 23rd of April and Wellington on the 25th of April. And we are also, I'm delighted to say, running our advanced certificate in anti-money laundering. We're running workshops on that qualification in Auckland and Wellington as well, again in late April. Enrolment is now open and there are details on the International Compliance Training's website, and you have the hyperlink there, int-comp.org.nz, /NZ I should say. So just a little bit about who the International Compliance Association is. We are a professional body that awards qualifications globally. We partner with the University of Manchester Alliance Business School, which is one of the world's oldest and most respected business schools. It's in the red brick business school sort of grouping. It's always consistently in the very top international business schools. So all of our qualifications are awarded in association with Alliance Manchester Business School, and they have an academic weight. So typically our diplomas, for example, constitute a third of an honours undergraduate degree. You can see from this map, we offer qualifications all over the world. We've trained in virtually every jurisdiction that has anti-money laundering laws. We have regional partners all around the world. We work with regulators. So in the UK here, we work with the National Crime Agency. We have representatives from regulators doing our programs in Singapore. We work with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And we have offices, our head offices in the UK, but we have offices in Dubai, Singapore, and New York as well. So we're truly global. Over 120,000 certifications have been provided by the ICA around the world, and we have members in over 112 countries. So it's a professional global network of compliance practitioners in a really exciting and interesting discipline that's grown to become, as you can see, a global profession. So I guess the big questions maybe for some of you watching this will be, well, how will this help my career? Which ICA qualification should I do and at which level? And those are pretty sensible questions. If you can come along to the open days, you will see we have a qualification framework. So this is all on our website as well, across three main disciplines: regulatory compliance, financial crime compliance, and which includes, anti-money laundering and financial crime prevention. So the purple discipline, if you like, is the financial crime compliance. The blue discipline on the left is regulatory compliance. And these qualifications, I won't go through the detail, you can see there are a lot of them, but they are at different levels, from entry-level certificate programs right up to master's level professional postgraduate diplomas. A benchmark qualification is our diploma, which, as I've mentioned before, is benchmarked to an undergraduate degree level, and our advanced certificate level are the next stage down, which are designed for practitioners and focus very much on practical skills. So again, the level ranges from introductory, intermediate, advanced, right up to expert level qualifications that are available. When we do our learning and qualifications, we adopt a blended learning approach. So that means people learn differently. So we have virtual classrooms, face-to-face workshops, assignments, tutor support, and there's a learning platform, which is an interactive web-based e-learning platform with self-assessment tools, self-study, videos, webinars, interactive elements as well, and a lot of dedicated tutor support from myself and the academic faculty which I run. The learning platform, state-of-the-art course materials, course manuals, but up-to-date topical course webinars, revision tools, assignments, self-assessment questions, and a Q&A forum, a chat room where you can talk to other practitioners around the world. A really great resource. And the workshops are fantastic, and I'm delighted that these are now running in New Zealand in April. You're in a room with other practitioners from different industries, different sectors, and run by very experienced, qualified practitioners who've been there, done that. They know what global best practice is in a practical level, and they're very enjoyable. It's a fascinating subject and very important and relevant. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope that's been of some interest and been useful. I look forward to hopefully meeting many of you in April in New Zealand, and delighted that the ICA qualifications are coming to the land of the long white cloud. As I say, my contact details, Becca Dare on the screen there, and thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.